Okay, we are continuing our Cornell notes on during reading strategies. So you're not changing big main idea. This is still during reading strategies. You're just taking more notes. The next reading strategy is determining sentence relationships, and the symbol is SR. And basically, that's when you're reading along. Many times, most of the time, authors put sentences next together to make comparisons, juxtapose ideas or images, and to really emphasize relationships among sentences like cause effect, compare, contrast, etc. So when you're noticing those relationships and they seem to be very striking, they're standing out to you, it'd probably be important to note that and what's standing out to you about those relationships. The next during reading strategy is drawing conclusions, and the symbol is DC. And this is where, when you're reading along, and you do this throughout your reading, uh, I call them my aha moments, where all of a sudden maybe you made a prediction and now you're picking up a clue and you can kind of draw a conclusion. Maybe your prediction hasn't been confirmed or denied, but you can still draw a conclusion. Maybe you've been making some inferences all along and you're stacking those inferences all together, and now you can draw a conclusion about a main idea or a theme or a subplot, etc., of the text. So again, I call them my aha moments, and they really deepen our comprehension, just like inferencing deepens our comprehension. The next symbol or the next reading strategy is making connections. And there's actually three different symbols that I have students use, and they're all part of the same reading strategy, making connections. The first is text to self connections, and the symbol is TTS, text to self. So that's when you're reading along. For example, I read this short story not long ago, The Necklace, and I was taken back to the very first time that I read that, and I will never forget it because the main character, her conscience is eating her alive for stealing a necklace. And when I read that, and it doesn't matter when I read it, it always takes me back to little 2-year-old me who stole a pack of gum, and I'll never forget my mom marching me back into the dime store. This tells you how old I am, and making me give it back to the clerk. And it was so vivid, and I don't remember much from that age, but I remember that because I thought I was going to go to jail, and I was petrified. And so, why do I tell you this? Because that was how long ago, almost 50 years ago, and I can still remember it to this day, and I can remember the text that I was reading that took me back to that experience. So when we are able to make these kind of strong connections to text, we are much more likely to remember what we read. Because be honest, how many of you have read through text and you get to the end and you have no idea what you just read? I know I've done that, especially if I'm bored with a text or it's very difficult. Well, when we can connect, it helps us remember what we read and stay engaged with what we're reading. The next connection is text to world, and the symbol is TTW. This is where we're reading along and we have an instant connection to something that's happening out there in the real world. So, for example, I was reading some water quality reports for Marquette, and one of the things that I was reading was talking about lead, and instantly it took me to what's going on in the real world in Flint, Michigan, with citizens of Flint being poisoned by their very own drinking water and the crisis that's going on there. So that's an example of a text to world connection. Another connection that we can make is text to text, and the symbol is TTT. And this is where, when we're reading a text, we're instantly reminded of another text that we've read. One of the examples that I'm going to read today for a model in another video is Going Green. And it's this whole idea of what we do and what we talk about as far as wanting a cleaner, safer earth. And while I was reading that, some of the lines in there reminded me of The Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, which is another text about our environment, in particular global warming. So that's what a text to text. So when you write that symbol, write what text it's reminding you of. And think about how helpful that could be when you're writing a paper where you have to synthesize multiple texts and draw evidence and support. You can organize those thoughts, those text to text connections as support in a paragraph. It'll help you with outlining, etc. I really want you to start seeing how helpful these reading strategies are in every step of the learning process, all the way through writing. The next during reading strategy is clarify, and the symbol is C. So you would put clarify whenever you need information clarified. So it's not like you're really confused. You just need to know a little bit more, or maybe you're a little bit foggy about some concepts and you just want clarification. So when you see that, kind of explain what you want clarified for your annotation so that you can seek out an instructor or peers or bring it up in class conversations. The next symbol is visualize, and the next reading strategy is visualize, and the symbol is V. Now this one is great. Really good readers. It's like when we read, a movie's going on in our heads. We can visualize everything that's happening. When that's particularly vivid while you read, I want you to jot down V and what is so striking. What are you seeing? What are you picturing in your head? And this is very helpful sometimes to connect to various plot points or juxtaposition of ideas or images that the author really wants us to pay attention to. The next strategy is analyzing author's craft, and the symbol is AC. So here's where you might see a really well-written metaphor or imagery, personification, whatever it might be, anaphora, and you point it out. I don't care that you know the name of the literary device the author's using. What I care to see in your annotation is a note about the powerful use of language and how it was powerful. So maybe you just say, oh, there was a comparison here that really helped me understand the character's inner thoughts, inner ideas, or really helped me understand the theme. That's all I'm really looking for. I don't really care if you know the name of the various literary devices. The next strategy is analyzing author's tone through his or her use of diction. So diction is word choice. And when authors develop a tone, which is the definition of tone is the author's attitude about what he or she is writing about, it's very important to pick up on that because many times there are tone shifts through a piece, and we need to understand what's the author shooting for? Why is there a tone shift here? When I model for you how to apply these reading strategies, that's one thing that I'm going to show you how I pay attention to it and how it helps me understand the overall main idea or the theme of the piece. So again, tone is the author's attitude about what he or she is writing. Let me give you a concrete example. Many times students get tone and mood confused. Mood is the feeling we get from a piece of writing, and tone is the author's attitude. So I don't know if any of you are Jon Stewart fans or now Trevor Noah. He's taken over The Daily Show. I really like the show, and many times the tone is very sarcastic. You know, they poke fun and use humor to really draw attention to serious ideas and issues in society. So the tone is humorous, but many times I walk away angry because of what's going, like the issues they're talking about. So the mood I'm taking away sometimes is anger, where the tone is very funny and sarcastic. So tone and mood don't always have to be the same. Happy, sad, angry, sarcastic. Many times they're not. The next strategy is highlighting. Now, if you highlight, and I strongly recommend you highlight, underline, draw symbols, there are a lot of other strategies that you can use while you're reading besides the one I'm asking you to use. But I ask students to highlight with a purpose. Because if you highlight 70% of a page and I ask you, well, what did you highlight? You won't be able to answer me. But if you highlight maybe just quotes that you intend to pull out and read during our class discussions, then you can tell me quotes that struck me as really important that I wanted to talk about. So I just recommend highlighting with a purpose and don't get too carried away with highlighting. Another strategy is determining fact or opinion, and the symbols are FO. Really important in nonfiction text to be able to distinguish between what is actually fact and what is someone's opinion. And maybe if it's opinion, maybe you want to look at the credentials of the person saying, so is it at least an informed opinion with some evidence to support it? Uh, Determining importance, and the symbol is DI. So when I see DI, I know that your annotation has to do with something you're not sure just how important this piece of information is, and you're still trying to figure that out, but you want to draw your attention to it. Also, determining importance, if you're ever struggling with those story problems in math, many times math teachers will say you need to determine the importance of the words in that story problem. Meaning, let's get rid of everything that is not crucial to this problem, this issue, this story problem, and just focus on what is. We only have two during reading strategies left. Surprising information. The symbol is an exclamation point. So when I see that, that means to me that you got to a point that you were totally shocked with what you were reading. And usually after the exclamation point, students will write what shocked them. Okay? And this is really great because many times that information they want to use either in class discussions or in papers, form, reader responses, etc. And again, it helps students stay engaged in the text. Monitoring comprehension is the last during reading strategy I'm going to talk about. And basically, when your comprehension